Well, hey everyone, my name is Cody Jensen. I'm the senior pastor at Good Shepherd Lutheran out here in Southern California, just bearing with the weather we have here, which is perfect all the time. But grateful to be with you this morning and to give you the devotional. In his book, Giving is the Good Life, Randy Alcorn shares the story of a really incredible couple, a couple named Jerry and Muriel Caven. They're a couple that worked really hard in life. They owned restaurants, they owned 2 banks, they had a ranch and a farm, they had real estate ventures, they had everything that you could imagine at their fingertips, and they had incredible wealth, as you can imagine. Jerry had turned 59. He was ready to move on to retirement. They were looking for a lake house in their retirement season, but something shifted in them, something that they didn't foresee coming. They went on a mission trip to a different country. They saw Christians working hard in this particular country, and it changed their hearts. It shifted their hearts, so much so that their whole lives, the way they used their wealth, the way they captured their wealth, the way they lived, even their views of retirement, seismically shifted. In fact, they got to a point where they were saying to themselves, if God calls us to give away everything we have, we are willing to do that for the gospel. We are willing to do that for God's sake and for his kingdom. What Muriel and Jerry were experiencing was essentially a burden of calling, that what they witnessed, what they experienced shifted something in them, so much so that their whole vocation, their whole direction seismically shifted. They were heading in a whole new, vast, different area of life, purely focused on the calling that God had placed on them. In the book of Nehemiah, which is probably my favorite book in the entire Bible, we see Nehemiah, we hear about this man named Nehemiah, and there's an incredible backstory to his life, his story, and what calling and what burden was put on him. In fact, his people had gone through years of exile, years in which they had been taken over by Babylonians and forced out of their land into different areas. In fact, he is exiled all the way to the city of Susa, which is very far from Jerusalem, very far from everything he had known, and he was the cupbearer for King Artaxerxes. He had a good life. He had responsibility. He had all these things before him, even in exile. And you would think once you have comfort, once you have power, once you have enough wealth, that you want to stay in that space, but he doesn't. He moves out of that space just like the Cavens, and he moves into a burden and a calling that has been placed on him by God to rebuild the walls so that his people could come back. They could come back and worship God, that they could be together. And it takes him all the way back, all the way from Susa, all the way back to his native land, into the promised land, in which he gathers people around. He is gathering them to push forward with a particular vocation, with the calling to build this wall. And what we find in his journey is it's a hard one, which is very similar to ministry. He has to rally his people together. He has to give assignments and a clear vision, and the burden and the burden on his heart in which he wants to see this come to fruition. And what happens throughout Nehemiah in the very first chapters is he actually deals with people who don't want the wall rebuilt. He deals with people that are not wanting those things to take place in the people around him, and even some of his own people. In other words, he goes through a really difficult experience trying to live out the calling that has been placed on him. But at the heart of it, Nehemiah has such a burden, so big, that it moves him to a calling. It moves him to see this thing through all the way to the end. It's not just a matter of we're going to try this and see if it works. He is dead set on building this wall, building up what was, so that the people can come back and experience God. What he wants for his people is he wants them to thrive. And I think for every pastor, every person in ministry, every Christian should have that desire in their heart, that they want their people, they want others to thrive. And the only way people thrive is to know this Jesus of Nazareth, this rabbi that we follow. And so the question that is laid before you and I is, what is the burden that God has placed on our particular hearts? I score through the roof in the area of evangelism. In other words, everywhere I go, people I see at coffee shops, I'm always looking for a way to start a conversation about Jesus, to understand what they believe, and to hopefully lead them into the direction of Christ. It burdens me so much that it's something I just cannot stop doing. It's part of who I am. It's part of how God has wired and gifted me. And it's something that I want people to know. I have that call in my life. In fact, Mark Laberton, in his book called, he says, the heart of God's call is this, that we receive and live the love of God for us and for the world. This is the meaning of the two great commandments, that we are made to love the Lord our God and with all we are, and our neighbor as ourselves. And the Bible as a whole, and Jesus in particular, reveals what such a life looks like. Our call is loving communion with God and God's world. It encompasses our identity, our community, and our activity. Essentially, it reshapes how we live, reshapes what we do. In fact, over the last year and a half at our church, or rather 2 years, we've identified what our true mission is. It's to know Jesus deeply, to live life authentically, and to lead others to Him. In other words, that is our burden that is placed on our church. We are meant to go out and accomplish that. And the way we do it is through our salty values, that our values of our church spell out the word SALTY as an acronym, and it's a servant-driven church, an all-generations church, a church where we do life together, that we're living out a transformational faith, and that we want to yield to the Spirit. And that's what we're all about at Good Shepherd. And so the question for you this morning to grapple with is, what burdens your heart that connects you so deeply and so passionately to live that out, that it alters your calendar, it alters the activity, it alters the way you live and who you spend your time with and the ways you spend your time. In other words, how are you using your gifting to live out the burden that God has placed on your life? And one of the postures we can take in that is that simply asking, Lord, what do you want from me? And how do I do this for you? What do you want from me? And how do I do this for you? So spend some time this week asking that question, Lord, what have you put on my heart? What is the burden on my heart to help others flourish in the way Nehemiah wanted his people to flourish? And don't be surprised if God shows you some new faces and some new people that will carry that forward. It's great to be with you today. Look forward to the next week where we get another LiveCalled devotional talking about Aaron. So look forward to next week as well. God bless you all.